Adam, absolutely delighted that you were able to take the time and join us in the studio. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Is this a busy time of year for you?
Well, it is really, yes. Particularly as I'm growing the practice in Newquay and out and about meeting lots of people and spreading the word about Newquay hypnotherapy and hypnotherapy in general. And overwhelmingly, people are generally very interested in it. So, yes, it is.
Tell us a bit about your background.
Well, I spent 20 years in personal development, in youth development and management development. Having graduated originally in physics and philosophy, I decided that people were the most interesting part of the real world. So I've been doing that for 20 years and just always really enjoying being around when people are getting excited about seeing new ways of doing things.
And so what brought you into the world of hypnotherapy?
Well, working in the sort of training and management development world, I almost by accident ended up helping people with phobias and to get over their phobias. So I had a client who was unhappy because she hadn't flown for 20 years, and I'd coincidentally just been taught how to treat phobias in a training course. So I gave it a go, very experimentally really, but it was extremely effective, and suddenly she was taking control of airport lounges and helping other passengers onto planes and flying for work and for pleasure, and it significantly changed her life.
Wow, that must have been, for you, to see that transformation in somebody, quite remarkable.
Well, it was, and it's just that sort of thing that really excites me, seeing people have different sort of learning experiences. But this really struck me as one which was life-changing. But more than that, it struck me as one which was really very easy. I really enjoyed the process. She really had a great time as well. And it took a couple of hours, and suddenly her life was quite noticeably different. So I thought, if that can be done and it's that much fun, I have to do some more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you still come across misconceptions around hypnotherapy?
To be honest, not as many as I might have expected. So I'm finding generally people are very open to the idea. Yes, they have some experiences of having seen it maybe on TV, and that's a little different from the practice of hypnotherapy. But that's all publicity. It's awareness, and people are aware of it, and people overwhelmingly, I find, are very open to the idea and quite interested to find out more.
So with hypnotherapy, how does it actually work in practice?
So the process starts with an initial consultation, and that's partly for me to understand a customer. But really it's for a customer to understand some of the basics of neuroscience and the basics of what's going on inside their head. So generally they find that while some are a little nervous coming in the door, generally they find they very quickly are able to understand what is happening in their heads. And more importantly, the good news of that, which is that since it's in our heads, that's something that we can control and in most cases quite easily change. So the initial consultation is really an explanation of how the brain works, how we create anxiety and depression and other sort of what you might term mental health issues, but also how we can overcome those things and change them and find and see new ways of doing things.
What are the different things that you've treated, or what do you treat?
Really, hypnotherapy is useful for anyone who's got a brain. And the brain is a very advanced organ, but it can also go wrong in some quite straightforward ways. So I've seen people, as I mentioned, for phobias, and phobias are remarkably common, so I regularly see people that don't like flying or travelling, who then quickly find that can be a very enjoyable experience. But the same can be applied to people who are afraid of spiders or other animals, other sorts of travel, or more generalised fears, such as going outside, so agoraphobia and broader fears like that. It can also be very effective for. There's a wide range of other applications, so anything really with an anxiety basis. So irritable bowel syndrome, for example, and some other medical conditions, which often have a fairly significant underlying stress sort of basis. They can be treated quite quickly and effectively.
For example, with the phobias that you mentioned earlier, I mean, I guess, is it a case of every client is different, or is there sort of a standard amount of time where you can actually get them from, working through that anxiety?
It's a great question, and to a degree, with something like very specific phobias, actually, in a sense, every customer is the same, because we all have the same brain, or at least the same structure in our brains, and phobias are caused by a very easily explained misfiring of a part of the brain. So in that sense, the cure for simple phobias is actually very straightforward. It's different and tailored, obviously, to each person's particular phobia, but the process is the same, and generally can be done successfully within 3 sessions. So over the course of 3 weeks, we'll meet, and then it's done. If someone's suffering from generalised anxiety, for example, or clinical depression, then the process is slightly longer, and that can take anything from 6 or 8 to 12 or more weeks. And for obsessive compulsive disorders, that can take can take a longer time as well.
I suppose with those things, is it because you have to actually explore the root of the anxiety or the root of the problem, I suppose?
That's another great question, and no. Generally, particularly in solutions-focused hypnotherapy, which is what we practice, no time is spent really addressing or exploring underlying causes or origins of these disorders. And really the only reason that it takes longer is because it's a more complex network of habits or habitual behaviour in the mind that just takes a bit longer to unlearn and explore.
So from your perspective, it's not about digging up the past and looking back at where everything stems from in terms of those anxieties potentially, but it's more about moving forward with your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's solutions-focused hypnotherapy pretty much spends the entire time either in the present, because relaxing and being in the moment is where our creative solutions come from, or thinking, imagining, visioning, literally seeing in our minds the future and to some extent discussing future goals, but really just creating a clear picture of the future and where it is that people want to get to. And then relaxing them so that their subconscious mind can go about the business of what it does best, which is bringing all of that imagined future to bear, to reality.
I mean, how much of your work is with people who need help with mental health?
Well, it's a question of definition, I suppose, and I'd like mental health to be seen as something that is very relevant to all of us. So just like physical fitness, it's something that we all deal with on a day-to-day basis. So in that sense, everyone that I see. And it's to a matter of degree, so people that are very, very normally functioning, very happy individuals that might be at an 8 or a 9 out of 10 on the general happiness scale might still have a very specific phobia that they want to overcome, or a fear that's holding them back in some significant way in their lives. And on the other hand, I do see people who've been, pretty close to the bottom of the end of that scale and who are gradually, slowly but surely working their way back up. So depending on how you define it, but however you define it, I'd say it's very helpful for anyone at any stage of that scale. And within that context, I think the scale, if it goes from 1 to 10, that might be because we only see the scale going to 10 at the moment, but actually the potential of human achievement is far greater than any of us have probably already seen. So that's an exciting direction to take the practice as well.
Definitely. Do you think in this country as a whole, aside from just hypnotherapy and treatments like hypnotherapy, do you think we're covered enough in terms of services that are available for people to help with mental health issues?
Well, no. I certainly hear a lot of stories of mental health provision not meeting requirements, both from a customer point of view, but also through lots of people I know that work in the mental health services and in the health system as a whole. So I do think demand is currently way outstripping supply in some way, and we need a revolution. I think nothing short of a revolution to address that situation. And I think we're on that route. And I think the wider awareness and openness about mental health and seeing it as something that we all do is a start of that. But I think we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's something we've covered a lot on this show, but there still, for some reason, seems to be some sort of a stigma around mental health, and it just doesn't seem to be fully going. And it does feel like, I know you mentioned before we started recording that information and education is so important at the moment for people.
Yes, and I think it's rooted in a long history. Hypnosis has been around for a long time, and back in the 1800s, there were surgeons who were using it because we didn't have anaesthetic, so it was used very effectively for pain relief. But somehow that wasn't necessarily welcomed and broadcast by other sectors of the system, and that knowledge has been slow to emerge. And maybe in this day and age, it's even been suppressed to a certain degree, partly because we've got drugs that can do the job. But I think we're at risk of forgetting some of those things. But I do see a lot of positive signs of those things beginning to re-emerge. But I think it's quite well established and actually quite ancient wisdom. So I'm very optimistic about these things coming back to the fore.
Do you think hypnotherapy will become a more frequent or a more common treatment for mental health issues moving forward?
Yes, absolutely, I do. The National Institute of Clinical Excellence already has certain recommendations. For example, irritable bowel syndrome, hypnotherapy is one of the first recommendations for treating that. And I think that trend will continue. And I also think that a move towards what you might call self-health, just people understanding and taking more responsibility and control for their own mental health, will continue. And that's a trend that's already going, and I think the awareness and understanding of those things is building. So I also wonder, it'd be great. It might take a long time, but in 10 years, I wouldn't be surprised, and I wouldn't mind if hypnotherapists had done themselves out of a job. And if everyone was able to, because the skills that we use are accessible to everyone, if everyone was able to do it themselves, then we'd all be a lot happier, more effective, and we could spend our time worrying about wider, more aspirational goals. That would be a very good place to get to. Yeah. Whether it takes 10, 20, 30 years, I'm not sure, but that we'll get there.
Absolutely. What advice would you give to someone who's perhaps listening to this and is intrigued by hypnotherapy, but perhaps feels a little apprehensive?
Yes, well, I guess there's lots of information available about the essentials of how the brain works, and modern hypnotherapy is very closely connected with brain science. So there's a lot of great information out there these days on that. That's the neuroscience of it. On the flip side, the art of relaxation. There's also a lot of available information there, so people can do that, and people can access techniques and methods for relaxing. So I think both of those things are in the public arena. In terms of hypnotherapy specifically, there are lots of hypnotherapists, a growing body. I'm very happy always to share. I'm very happy to talk to more groups and go out and just try and reach wider audiences on the topic. My website's got a lot of information in it. I'll be continuing to tweet lots of top tips and information, because that's very important. And I'm a member of several associations who are dedicated to the public awareness and understanding of hypnotherapy.
What's the sort of reaction you get from clients that you work with who've been through the process with you?
Well, my aim is that people leave with a smile on their face, and that's always the case. So generally people say, maybe I was a little nervous coming into it, but actually found it very relaxing and really quite enjoyable. And I think that's partly because, and this is often something I hear my customers saying, that they didn't realise that they'd actually be so well informed, both of some of the practicalities and theory is too strong a word for it really, but some of the ideas behind it, but also the process. So I think customers experience very early on in the process that it's maybe a lot more straightforward and natural than they think, and then they generally enjoy it. They enjoy it more than they maybe thought they would.
Brilliant. If people want to find out any more information about you and your practice, how can they do so?
NewquayHypnotherapy.com is my website, so that gives a pretty concise and good description of the practice and the techniques and how it works. And people have told me that's a calming experience just to visit the website, so that's good. That's as it should be. Also, Newquay Hypnotherapy has a page on Facebook, so I'm pretty active on there. And on Twitter, as I say, I'm putting out information and top tips and thoughts for the day on a very regular basis, and that's at Newquay Hypno. So those would all be ways to communicate. And I'm delighted to have conversations with people on the telephone. My contact details are on the website.
Fantastic, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it, and we wish you all the best of luck with your practice, and it would be great to get you back on the show at a later date.
I love that. Thank you very much.